state of Georgia, has been front and center when it comes to the issue of voting rights, with the very controversial bill that was passed. And we saw over the last couple of days, Major League Baseball pulled the All-Star game. So again, politics and baseball comes together. So maybe it's apropos that we're doing. At least I'm, streaming from a baseball field, because that was one of the biggest news in the last week. A very swift action by Major League Baseball to pull the All-Star game from Atlanta this summer, and they are now looking for an alternative location to have the All Star game. I know Milwaukee has been on the list, because one of the interesting things was that this summer's All Star game, for those who love baseball, know the Midsummer Classic was supposed to be a commemoration of the life of Hank Aaron, and that's why they were going to do it in Atlanta. So they may do it in Milwaukee, where Hank Aaron spent the early time of his career, with then the Milwaukee Braves before they moved to Atlanta. So I guess we should just start, with our oftentimes our Southern correspondent, the native Georgian, Miracle Jones. I guess let's just start with, still the aftermath of the controversial, voting bill in the state of Georgia. Could you just give us, update and your take on Major League Baseball decision to pull out of the state of Georgia, and then we'll jump to Ryan.
Yeah, it was one of the more shocking and surprising decisions that have resulted from the passing of the new voting rights. Well, excuse me, the voting regulatory bill, because while people were calling on a lot of corporations to speak out, and traditionally there has not been as much engagement on Major League Baseball side when it comes to some of these issues. We know more. We've seen more in the past couple of years. Basketball players, football players engaging in social justice action more so than Major League as a whole, even though there have been individual players who engaged around social justice issues. And so when the announcement came, it was very shocking, but it's also coming against this false narrative that crime is there's a wave of crime going on in Atlanta, while there's also the argument over taxes. So this is a huge loss. There's over expected at least $100 million in revenue that has been lost because of this. But the governor Kemp, he said that he's doubling down. He believes that this is going to motivate people as he seeks reelection. But the issue with these bills, again, it limits the number of early voting days. It limits some of the drop boxes. It makes it a crime to give people food and water. And again, we had upwards of 10 hours of people waiting in line last election because of a variety of issues. And so people are rightly upset about the limiting of the access to vote and criminalizing traditional Southern behaviors. So in the South, we collectively give people food and water. We do souls to the polls. It's just a communal aspect that people feel that are targeting Black people. So that's why there's so much outrage for that. But yeah, and Ryan.
Absolutely. Thank you, Miracle, for breaking all that down. And really, as both of y'all have already, suggested, I think this was a pretty surprising move, or at least just, the swiftness of this move. I knew there was going to be talks about this, because the couple of days prior, there had been some mentions of them possibly, moving the game. But just, how swiftly they acted on that and actually took that, tangible to some degree action, really surprised me a lot. As Miracle alluded to as well, it's really been the NBA and even more so the WNBA a lot of the time, that as an entire league position themselves at the forefront of a lot of these issues. So short of the PGA moving the Masters from Augusta, I think this is really one of the more surprising moves that could have come from a professional sports league in this capacity. Again, it was expected that a lot of corporations would put out some sort of statement in opposition to this. It's always tough to see how much of an impact that would really have with no tangible action beyond that. But I think this was definitely a more prominent move than that. And hopefully we'll make other state governments think twice about taking similar action, because Pennsylvania is among the highest number of voter suppression bills that have currently been introduced of any state in the country. So hopefully that'll have some impact across the nation.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we're going to take a deep dive into voting rights and elections. And before I do that, I do want to just mention that since, we all last met, 2 more people have joined the race for the United States Senate in 2020. We have State Senator Sharif Street announced his intention to form exploratory committee. And I believe today or yesterday, Montgomery County Commissioner Valerie Arkush has also announced her candidacy, for the United States Senate as well. So you can see it's going to be a very, very crowded field. And I believe that Lieutenant Governor, Fetterman announced a very large fundraising haul for the most recent reporting period. So I would still imagine that he is still the most prominent candidate in the race with the largest name, obviously, the one statewide elected candidate so far, in the race. But as you can see, that is not deterring other elected officials, particularly from the southeastern part of the state, to jump in. I think one of the questions that's going to come up now is when you have a number of prominent southeastern Pennsylvania Democrats in the race, are they going to cancel each other out? And with John Fetterman, the only major candidate from the western part of the state so far in the race, does that give him a decided advantage, in a race where it's one western candidate and potentially multiple southeastern Pennsylvania candidates in the race?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Khari. I was actually going to just mention a similar thing. Fetterman is the largest name in the race right now, and there's a good chance he will be throughout the whole campaign process. But I would say Representative Kenyatta is probably the second biggest name that we might end up see running for this position. So obviously Fetterman still had some advantage of name recognition, against Kenyatta prior to these other candidates joining in. But it'll be really interesting to see, how much, Representatives or Senator Street and others entering in that race will really, amplify that impact.
Absolutely. I definitely want to go to Miracle to get your take on, a big news from last week that so much going on. Sometimes, you forget, but I was going to say mayor, but Representative Kenyatta got a significant endorsement from Mayor Sharday Jones and Braddock, which was, in my opinion, a major political coup for, Representative Kenyatta to be endorsed by the mayor of the town, that really built, the Fetterman brand. We all know that, now Lieutenant Governor Fetterman, definitely raised his profile to national prominence, as, the mayor of Braddock, the Colbert Report and, the various, the Levi's campaign and all those things that happened, under the tenure of, John Fetterman. Definitely was a big political story across the state that, the mayor of the town that made John Fetterman famous went the other way and decided to endorse Malcolm Kenyatta.
Yeah, I think that politics is very interesting, but it speaks to a bigger issue of what is going to be the weaknesses of the Fetterman campaign around race, specifically because of prior incidences. And so there is a disconnect there. And so there's also, we're talking about East-West, we also got to think about like age as well. There is, the millennial boomer type disconnect that's going on. So you're wanting people are running to want like more radical change and want to see Pennsylvania shift. So I think this upcoming Senate election is really going to be a lot about what is the identity of Pennsylvania, where we're looking at Are we moving away from fracking? Are we moving to green industry? Are we going to move to legalization of marijuana? Are we going to try to invest more in agriculture? Are we going to be the home of this new infrastructure boom? And what does that look like? And so I think that we're going to be moving away from the Allegheny, Philadelphia County fights, but looking more along ideological lines. And all of these candidates bring something different to the table. And what I do think, what we mentioned earlier, is the Senate race is almost Fetterman's to lose. He does have the most money, he is the most recognizable, and he has already previously canvassed Pennsylvania 3 or 4 times, one when running for office, and a couple of times with the marijuana listening tours, and then again with the parole and pardon tours. So he knows what people are looking for. He knows the issues, and he knows what's going on. What's going to, I think, make or break the Fetterman campaign is going to be on policies. What can he bring, especially if marijuana legalization is taken up at the federal level? What else is he going to be able to pioneer for the Commonwealth? And that's something I think that he's still developing right now. And then you have Senator Street, who a lot of people are liking him because he does a lot of stuff with the criminal justice. So the people who like Fetterman because of what he's done to parole and pardons may be intrigued by Senator Street. And so it's going to be a very interesting debate as we go on. But I think what is going to maybe hurt the Democrats is going to be election fatigue, because we're already like a year and a half out from this election and everybody's going to be running. So that's going to be a lot of money, a lot of time spent, a lot of canvassing. And if we're now in these perpetual election cycles, I think people are just going to get burnt out and stop participating because everybody keeps running.
That's that's an interesting point, and I definitely did just want to touch on one of the things that you happened to mention, which was the marijuana legalization. As we see, the state of New York just passed it, very expeditiously. Governor Cuomo has been under a lot of scrutiny, very valid scrutiny, and he's been under a lot of pressure. Didn't hold a public signing ceremony, sign the bill in public, move forward. I guess over the next year and a half, the state of New York is going to figure out, how to implement it. So that, for a state like Pennsylvania, now I believe, New Jersey has already moved forward with that. And now we're looking at the state of New York. That definitely, I saw State Representative Jake Wheatley, post something about it. Now, we're nearly going to be surrounded by neighboring states, that are going to have, a legal recreational marijuana market, and then how does that put Pennsylvania at a disadvantage, particularly when we all know the majority of Pennsylvania's population is in the southeastern quadrant, which is the closest proximity to New York and New Jersey. So what does that do to potential entrepreneurs in the state of Pennsylvania that would potentially want to move into that market? What does that mean for folks who have been in the criminal justice system? Because of these tough on crime, these draconian drug laws, the tens of thousands of people over the last decades in the state of Pennsylvania. So how does all those pieces fit in? It's going to be a very interesting thing to watch. Just wanted to get your perspectives really quick before we invite our first guest to the conversation.
Yeah, I think the thing about what New York has done and what also Senator Wheatley is proposing is this reparational aspect to it, where people who've been impacted by marijuana policies get their records expunged and also get to be permitted to come into the industry. I also like to point out the Michigan, which is somewhere next to somewhere next to us, also has legalized marijuana, but they've also did limited amount of certificates and licenses, and they've set aside a number of licenses specifically for people with marijuana convictions. And so we have the blueprint to do this in Pennsylvania, but we're going to be losing millions, if not billions, of dollars if we refuse to legalize it, regulate it, have adult use cannabis, because there's so many businesses that come with it. outside of the agriculture, the transportation, the testing, the regulation, the food market, And so I think it's also necessarily really needed because like the mental health issues that are going on. So I think now that Governor Wolf is talking about it, now we're going to be seeing all of this money that we're losing. It's going to encourage some people on the conservative side to take up the bill.
Right.
Absolutely. I think that, yeah, given the economic fallout of the pandemic, all the budget cuts statewide, countywide that we've seen, I think that's really going to be the crucial factor that, is able to sway a lot of Republican legislators on this issue. We've seen that be able to potentially sway legislators on a lot of issues at this point, even going back to our show last week on the Juvenile Justice Task Force, where we were talking about just the amount of money saved by a lot of these reforms was what was going to be crucial, to swaying a lot of these Republican legislators who might otherwise default to kind of that tough on crime mindset. But just given the economic state of everything after the pandemic, trying to rebound and compete with these other states, economically from an income standpoint, I think that's going to be a really crucial factor in pushing that forward and passing that legislation on a much quicker timeline.
Absolutely. And before we jump into our first guest, Miracle, could you just talk a little bit about who will be joining us tonight and just give a quick 30-second overview of all the wonderful guests and the great conversation we have on tap for everyone this evening.
Yes, like we said at the top of the hour, there's a lot going on in the world of voting rights, whether it's new legislation or changes to the election rules, and even what we learned a few weeks ago about the new voting maps that are also coming out like once every 10 years. So there's a lot of things that are going on at the ballot box that we need to be prepared for, we need to be mindful of. And so our first guest works with, All Politics is Local, has been leading the fight to get transparency in the local elections. So we know the rules to drop box how we're actually voting. And so I believe our first guest is going to be Aryan Abney coming on, talking about the work they've been doing and the script that they put out today and some of the demands. So welcome to the platform, Mr. Abney. Thank you for joining us.
All right. Hey, Miracle. Hey, everybody. Thank you for having me again. Great to be back on the show and great to be able to be participatory in some of the work that you all are doing and advocating and educating folks about their rights. So thank you. Really appreciate the opportunity to be on your platform.
Thank you so much for joining us. I wanted to touch on the letter that was sent to the County Board of Elections, and it's not only been you, but thank you for your leadership and speaking up on this issue and bringing it to light to so many other concerned people. But there is a general feeling that there was a lot of efforts, this time last year to figure out a variety of ways from the state level all the way down to the local level with our local Board of Elections to provide options for people to participate. And we saw in the fall they had the satellite voting centers, which were part of the legislation in 2019 that created no excuse of mail-in voting, and it just seems from the perspective of many, particularly voting rights advocates, that to use a term of the young people, it's like they don't have that same energy that they had in 2020. In 2021. So you could just touch a little bit on that, of some of the obstacles that we're seeing at the local level for those advocates who really want to make sure that people have a variety of options to get their voice heard in this primary election.
Yeah, that's a great way to frame kind of what we're dealing with now in 2021. Last year's election, because of how large of a scale it was and how much attention was on Pennsylvania, and particularly on Allegheny County, there was a lot of pressure on election officials and elected officials to make the right decisions, right, about expanding access to the ballot for voters. And it kind of get this vibe and this energy that since that has now passed, folks have taken a more nonchalant approach to this upcoming election, which sometimes happens because people look at it as if it is not a presidential election. So the thought process is maybe not as many people will be engaged, maybe not as many people will end up voting. And so maybe that means not as many people will be paying attention, but that's not the case. Organizations like ours at All Voting is Local and One Hood and others really made it a point after the last election to say, hey, we can't let our foot off the gas on these elections officials, because we know that elections happen every year. They don't happen just once every 4 years. And so there should be no excuse for any election official at any county level to not have plans and preparations for the subsequent election. And this one in the primary is set for May 18th. However, we know that because people have the ability to vote by mail and to vote early, that people will start casting their ballots in the next couple of weeks. And so the challenge is Allegheny County has yet to hold a public board meeting, a public Board of Elections meeting all of 2021, which means they have not shared their plans of what this election will look like in comparison to what it looked like last fall, right? So last fall we had, I think, 9 drop box locations. We had a lot of folks early voting at satellite offices, and many folks, took advantage of those opportunities. But now voters don't know if that opportunity is going to be available to them this upcoming election. And so we've been pressing the election board and elections office for several months since the beginning of 2021, asking them, hey, what is your plan? And one of the reasons is, yes, they're government agencies, they're supposed to be transparent. Like that's obvious, but also it makes it difficult for organizations like One Hood and others who do voter engagement and voter outreach to tell voters what they should be expecting. Right? It's hard for you all to run programming and tell the voters that you constantly contact, yeah, there's going to be a drop box for you to take advantage of, or there isn't going to be a drop box, which then will allow voters to have an opportunity to make their plan to vote, whatever that may look like. And so we penned a letter along with several other groups who work locally in Allegheny County around different social justice issues to the Board of Elections. And we urged them to hold a public board meeting before April 15th. So we sent the letter, I think, on the last day of March, and gave them basically 2 weeks to hold a public board meeting. And so they were scheduled by law to hold a public board meeting on May the 4th. But again, that's 2 weeks before the election. We know that 2 weeks before the election, the decisions are already made, right? You're not really being transparent. You already decided what you want to do behind closed doors. What we're saying is, if you're going to have a plan for this upcoming election, do it in public and let the public see how the planning process happens, and let us decide whether we approve of it or we don't approve of it. And so we just got breaking news today, that the Board of Elections has changed their board meeting from May 4th to now April 13th. So a week from tomorrow, they will be holding a public Board of Elections meeting where they should be telling folks about what the election will look like this upcoming primary. And the sad part is we shouldn't have to put pressure on folks to be transparent. We shouldn't have to write letters. We shouldn't have to have organizations calling into the county exec's office demanding they have a board meeting. We shouldn't have to have folks sending emails to the Board of Elections saying, why aren't you doing your job? Like that should be automatic, right? That should be something that they should morally be feeling like they should be doing, to be transparent and open about what's going on in this upcoming election. Because you have places we talk about the southeast part of Pennsylvania, kind of the things that are happening over there. You have places like Delaware County, Montgomery County, Philadelphia, Chester. All of those counties have already committed and said that they're going to do drop boxes in this upcoming election. Allegheny County has not said that. They haven't told people what they're going to do. In fact, Delaware County is planning to do 41 drop boxes this upcoming election. In a general election, presidential election last year, Allegheny County only did 9. And you're talking about in a primary election, Delaware County is doing 41. I just want people in Allegheny County to sort of understand and not just have this sort of regional perspective on how we operate and how we work, because we always try to consider ourselves to be progressive in some spaces. But yeah, we're progressive when you compare us to Somerset County and Beaver County or Westmoreland County. But when you think about the things that folks are doing in Philadelphia and Delaware and Montgomery and Chester, and how the elections are being managed and run, people in Allegheny County, if they knew how that was happening, they would look a lot different they would view their elections officials here in Allegheny County a lot differently because they're not doing nearly as much as some other counties are doing.
Ryan, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thanks, Khari. And thank you, Aryan, for joining us tonight and for providing all that information. And so you said this board meeting is now on April 13th, correct?
April 13th at 2 p.m. There should be an update on the Allegheny Board of Elections website sometime, hopefully this week. And as soon as we get it, we'll definitely share it out with you. But it's 2 p.m. on the 13th, next Tuesday.
Awesome. So, so just to clarify, like people will be able to tune in virtually or be able to watch that somehow. And then just, along those lines, what sort of information should people be listening for most attentively, in relation to what's going to be discussed in that meeting?
So we haven't got the details of the agenda yet for the meeting. We haven't got the details on whether it's going to be, people are going to be able to go down to the Allegheny County Elections Office or the courthouse to give public comment or testimony. The assumption is that it's probably going to be virtual because most of the County Board of Elections meeting have kind of been virtual. The concern that we have is whether they're going to allow folks to still give public comment during that virtual period. The assumption that they probably won't, but they will allow folks to give written testimony and comments in advance of the meeting. And so once we have confirmation of that and we have a link, we're going to start to reach out to partners and encourage folks to write down their comments and their testimony about some of the things that they found were beneficial in last year's election, like drop boxes and satellite offices, to push and urge and say, hey, we want this to continue here in Allegheny County. So that's something that they should really be looking for in this election meeting is the board going to vote on implementing drop boxes and early voting satellite offices in this upcoming election. Those are two major pieces of sort of the election reform that Khari mentioned earlier that was passed that allow folks more access to the ballot and more options. And being able to cast a ballot early has multiple benefits. It helps to reduce the amount of folks who actually end up waiting in line on election day because if the majority of those folks vote early, you don't have them waiting in line. So it reduces that long wait time of, sometimes an hour or 2 hours. And it also it releases the pressure valve on a lot of our election day poll workers who, are volunteers. They have a lot of responsibilities on their hands on election day. And so the less people that they have to interact with on election day, the easier that it makes their job. And we're still in a pandemic, right? So the less people that have to interact with each other on a face-to-face kind of basis, and that can vote by mail or can vote early or can drop it off at a drop box, the less human interaction happens on election day, which can help to potentially reduce the spread of COVID-19.
So for those who are, concerned, about the lack of options and want to, reach out, to the Board of Elections, who are the Board of Elections and who should they be reaching out to?
Yep. So you have so the Board of Elections in Allegheny County is made up of three folks. One is Sam DeMarco. He is Allegheny County council person. The other one is Bethany Hallam. She's also a county council member. And then the third person, who's the chair of the board, is the county executive, Rich Fitzgerald. So he has the authority to call a meeting whenever he wants to, because as the chair of the board, that's his role and his responsibility. And so that's why when we really pinned the letter to the board, we really were addressing the county executive, because we're like, the other two board members don't have the legal authority to call a board meeting. Only you have the legal authority to do it. So we need you to do that. So we are really encouraging folks to reach out to those three members, Sam DeMarco, Bethany Hallam, and Rich Fitzgerald, to really be able to voice your concerns about what you want to see in this upcoming election. And you can find all of their information if you go onto the Allegheny County Board of Elections website. You can find information about the Board of Elections members, as well as, it may not be up there today, but hopefully within the next couple of days, there will be a link where you can view the live streaming cast of the Board of Elections meeting, as well as there should be a link for you to be able to submit public comments so that the board members can read those public comments, hopefully during the board meeting on the 13th.
Miracle?
Oh no, I was just putting that information for people in the chat. And so I know you were talking about what is going on with the Board of the Elections and what some of the other counties are doing. And as we're still in this COVID-19 crisis, one of the groups of people that everyone has been very concerned about is our elderly voters who traditionally are always active, always engaging, always voting. Have you heard at all any voting plans that are going to be targeting our elderly voters, our voters with disabilities, to see how they're going to be able to engage? As we still know, this vaccine rollout is still starting, and there's still, a lot of people who haven't yet had access to it. So have you heard anything about that, or has there really been like kind of radio silence for this election?
We have not heard of any outreach to those folks in that community coming directly from the Allegheny County Board of Elections or the elections office. Now, I'm sure there are campaigns and candidates who are running for office that probably rely on elderly votes because they know elderly people tend to cast ballots. So I'm sure they're doing direct outreach. But part of the responsibility of your government institutions that manage and run the elections is to inform people about the upcoming election. So part of the responsibility, and I would say the majority of the responsibility, should not really be on even organizations like ours and organizations like yours to do the outreach. We do that because we know that there's a gap in services, right? But we pay taxes and some of our tax dollars go to run and pay for the Board of Elections to manage elections. And so part of that responsibility is for them to be doing outreach to voters all across Allegheny County to let them know, hey, if you have concerns about COVID, here's additional options instead of voting in person that you can do to still feel like and know that your vote is going to be counted and your vote is going to be safe and be secure. So to date, and to my knowledge, they have yet to do that. And that's one of the other advocacy pushes that our organizations is really, trying to make sure that our elections officials and our elections office takes responsibility for what they're supposed to be doing in terms of educating the voters about what's coming up.
That's really great information. I don't know, Ron, did you have a final question?
Yeah, I did just want to ask real quick, just to clarify for anyone listening about the permanent mail-in voting list that Pennsylvania has, that to my understanding, people still have to apply for on an annual basis. So if you could just provide some information about, when the deadline is to do that for this election, and how people can go about doing that if they haven't yet this year.
Yeah, so the permanent early voting list is kind of misleading, the terminology of it, because the assumption is that you only have to kind of fill it out once, and you never have to fill out for application again. But that's not true, and the reality is that it is an annual application that you have to fill out. What checking that box does is tells the county to mail you a document that is the application form, and you have to fill it out, either the paper form, or they really try to encourage you to fill it out online, because less paper for them is easier to sort of process, and more paper, things get lost in the mail, they can't read people's handwriting, so they really encourage you to do it online. So it's not a verbatim permanent list. You are always going to be on the list to get an application form, and then you decide that year if you want to vote by mail or not. And once you get sent out in the spring and you apply for it, you'll get it for the spring election, and then you'll also get it for the general election towards the end of the year. And so we're encouraging folks, if you did get that in the mail recently, because those went out, don't ignore it because you think that you already signed up last year for the permanent list. Make sure that you complete that vote by mail application form, either through the paper form or go online and complete it, or else they're not going to send you your ballot in the mail, and you'll have to go and vote in person. The deadline for that is the 11th of May, so a week before the election. But again, we encourage folks, don't wait until May 11th to submit your form, because it's a process for them to read it, to review it, process it, and get it mailed out to you for you to fill out your ballot and send it back. And sometimes it may take longer than a week, and you don't want to necessarily take that risk, which is another reason why we are really pushing the Board of Elections to have drop boxes, because just in case somebody does get their ballot and say they get their ballot two or 3 days before the election and don't feel confident that it's going to get back through the mail in time, they can go drop it off at the drop box and still know that their vote is going to be counted.
Well, thank you so much for that information. For those who are just joining us, we've been joined by Aryan Abney from All Voting is Local, talking about some of the challenges that local voters in Allegheny County are facing to exercise their right to vote with the same number of options that they had last fall. And before you leave, Aryan, could you please give folks information again about the upcoming Board of Elections meeting on, I believe it was April 13th.
Yes, April 13th at 2 p.m. It is most likely going to be live streamed. You can go to the Allegheny Board of Elections website, and they will have the link up and posted there, hopefully within the next couple of days. We'll also, make sure we reach out to you all, one hood, and you can share it on your social media for your followers as well. And then we also are encouraging folks to speak up and speak out, to be advocates for things like drop boxes and early voting. And this upcoming election board meeting is an opportunity for you to have your voice heard. And so we are encouraging folks, when the link is available, to submit public comments, telling the Board of Elections you want to see things like drop boxes and early voting and early voting sites available for this upcoming election.
Thank you so much. And again, that was Aryan Abney from All Voting is Local, giving us information about the upcoming Allegheny County Board of Elections meeting, 2 p.m. on April 13th. Thank you so much for joining us again. We'll definitely have you back on before the primary election so we can do a status check as we get closer, to make sure that we are making progress in this area. So thanks so much for all the work that you do.
Looking forward to it, y'all. Thanks for having me. Have a good one.
Thanks so much. And again, that was Aryan Abney from All Voting is Local, talking about the upcoming Allegheny County Board of Election meeting, April 13th at 2 p.m. To discuss the state of the primary election and what options are going to be available for voters, from potential satellite locations to mail-in voting, to how in-person voting on election day is going to be handled as well. So moving from local elections to redistricting, Miracle, could you give us a little bit of an introduction to our next guest and why we're talking about redistricting as well as part of this whole voting rights, the state of our elections discussion?
Yes, so as Ariane has talked about, how we're going to vote, one of the things that are important is like where we vote and why. And that is based on maps that are drawn up and written by our Pennsylvania legislature that put us in various districts. And it actually changes once a decade, so like every 10 years. And that time is now coming up for Pennsylvania. And so to talk about the maps, things that are changing and how and why we should get involved, we want to bring in Amelia and Fernando to just explain what the processes are, to answer some questions, and to get people excited about drawing maps.
How are you guys? Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's great to be here.
So thank you for joining us. Miracle, do you want to start off with the first question?
Yes. So what basically is redistricting and why is it so important for Pennsylvania voters to be aware of what's going on?
So, Miracle, you did a great job at explaining it. Basically, every 10 years, we have the census. The census gives us the new number of how many Americans, how many people actually live in the country. And based on that, you have a process called apportionment that basically gives you the number of districts that each state should have and how many people should live in that district. And based on that information, then you apply certain criteria that changes from state to state, and that's how the maps are drawn. The bigger problem here, and it's great that you guys are talking about voting rights and voter suppression, because one of the issues that a lot of people don't put next to each other is gerrymandering and voter suppression. So gerrymandering is when elected officials manipulate the maps to actually pick and choose their own voters, right? So a way to suppress the vote of people, it's maybe, yeah, we're going to let you vote, but your vote is not going to count because we are manipulating the congressional or the legislative maps to a point where the people that are supposed to be elected are the ones electing their voters with through gerrymandering. So we at the DRC, the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, just imagine we are the national hub for everything redistricting, right? At the national level, we have offices in 10 states, including Pennsylvania, and we have a very comprehensive approach to deal with redistricting. We have a 501c3, the National Redistricting Foundation, that focuses mostly on education and doing some litigation in some states. We have a 501c4 where all on the line are public-facing campaign leads that we do a lot of the advocacy component, but also, NDRC, it's our 527. It's a political entity that will allow us to be more political when the process calls for it. Some of the things one of the things that Pennsylvanians don't know is that we actually have one of the most politicized redistricting process in the country. Why? Because you were describing it very well at the beginning. Our legislative maps are drawn by a commission that is supposed to be independent. However, the commission is constituted by legislators, right? Majority and minority leaders in both chambers appoint themselves to be 4 members of that commission, and then they get to choose who's the 5th member and serves as the chair. If they cannot agree, then the Supreme Court intervenes. And on the other hand, the congressional maps, they are drawn by legislation, by legislators as well. So it's like a regular bill. They draft a bill, is introduced in the House and in the Senate, and then it moves to the governor to be signed or to be vetoed. So it is very important for us to play an important role in the Commonwealth, not only educating communities of interest, not only doing advocacy with grassroots, but at the same time, we need to make sure that we have a political presence because this is a very political process.
Interesting. Ron, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Fernando, for breaking all that down. Explaining how this is all interconnected with voting rights, voter suppression, and the mutual importance of those two things. And so you mentioned you have the 501c3, the 501c4, and the 527. You talked a little bit about the areas of work that each of those organizations is involved in. So just if either of you could elaborate a little bit more on that, as far as what your strategy is for engaging communities on why this issue is important, teaching them how to advocate on behalf of that, or just talk about some of the more politically based work that you're doing in that field as well.
That's great. Thanks so much for asking. I'm actually going to field this one, Ryan. Thanks so much. So on the engagement end, I'm doing a lot of the citizen engagement portion of this project. I'm working as the Western Pennsylvania digital organizer, and you folks, One Hood, were nice enough to partner with us last week on one of our first education initiatives. So we're doing a lot of work on citizen education to make sure that people are aware of the process, engaged in the process, and that they know going forward how to educate others about this process, because a lot of people aren't even aware that this is a redistricting year or how our day-to-day lives are impacted by redistricting and the ways in which it impacts how we vote. More so on our NDRC side, I'm holding a series of volunteer meetings. We've actually got our first one tomorrow, and we'll be discussing more about local gerrymandering issues and how we can engage our representatives in a dialogue about impacting their decisions in the redistricting process going forward, to make sure that they know we're paying attention to what they're doing going forward.
On the political side, Ryan, as I have shared with you in the past, again, it is very important for us to develop relationships with elected officials, but to be honest, have that freedom of being political while we talk to them. So I'm a registered lobbyist in Harrisburg under NDRC, and we want to make sure that we're influencing the process. As I was mentioning before, again, our approach is very comprehensive, and we're not only doing the grassroots component that Amelia described before, but we believe that it's very important to have that freedom to talk to elected officials and to be able to push them whenever they need to be pushed. It is a reality that Pennsylvania, again, is one of the most gerrymandered states in the country. Republicans have been in charge of the redistricting process for the last couple of cycles, so for the last 20 years. So for us, it's very important to be able to develop relationships in Harrisburg, not only to influence the process, but to also to have to make sure that communities of interest are represented, and that those elected officials who are supposed to draw the maps are here in the public. So that's kind of the political approach that we're providing in state.
And at a quick just a quick question: Are there places around the country that do it better or than other places, that provide like a best practice or a model of how it's supposed to be done to do redistricting in a way that's fair?
We're working on that, and I think that that's a great segue to talk about HR1 and S1. Basically, each state has their own rules, so it's difficult to identify, which state is better. If you ask me, obviously having a truly independent redistricting commission is the way to go. Making sure that commission is, non-partisan and independent. And I know that there has been efforts in the state, and there are great groups like, Committee of 70 and Common Cause and Fair Districts PA pushing for that reform. But the reality is that even if we are successful in the next couple of years to get it done, that is not going to influence this redistricting process. That's why we need to be political. So long term, of course, having an independent and non-partisan commission would be the best approach. Short term, at least in Pennsylvania, we need to get as political as we can. But the reality as well is that right now, if you're familiar with the For the People Act, it's a piece of legislation that was already passed in the House in DC that actually prohibited partisan gerrymandering, but also protects voting rights. And that is why we also are getting involved at that national discussion, because right now it has been introduced in the Senate. And as you can imagine, as you well know, the craziness that happens in the Senate, having the 50-50 tie and the filibuster and all of that stuff, it is essential for the future, not only of voting rights, but again, for the future of redistricting, that the Senate votes in favor of S1.
Interesting. And that's really great information. Go ahead.
And I'm saying for Pennsylvania, it's not only a redistricting year, but we're losing a district this year, correct? And so how is that factoring into this, the fact that this only happens, every so often, but because our population is decreasing for a variety of reasons, we're going to be losing an elected official. And how are you seeing this play out in Harrisburg?
So just to be precise, Pennsylvania is actually gaining just a little bit of population, but other states are gaining way more than we are. So because we have a very specific set of Congress people appointed to Congress, we're going to lose one seat. Other states like California are going to gain 3. Florida is going to gain 2, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, you are correctly. If the census numbers and the reapportionment data that is coming out in the next few weeks, it's what we're predicting. We are going to lose 1 district. And that's when you go internally and see how the population is shifting in the Commonwealth. And everything seems to indicate that that district should come either from central Pennsylvania or from western Pennsylvania. Still, that is going to be up to the elected officials that they are in charge of drafting the legislation that creates the congressional maps. How is that playing in Harrisburg? Again, the legislative maps are not going to be affected, but as you can imagine, the political interaction between the congressional delegations and Harrisburg at the state level, it's very heated right now because everyone is trying to protect their own district. All of the incumbents are trying to protect their own districts. And at the end, this is a process that is supposed to be driven by data, right? Where is the people coming, where are the people going, and we should be focused on that. But that's why it's very important that we have this political presence in Harrisburg, because at the end, our elected officials in the Senate and in the State House are the ones deciding exactly where that district should come from.
And you were saying that the For the People Act is going to possibly eliminate political gerrymandering. For our viewers, can you give some examples? Because I know on the training last time you had like the eagle or the, but can you just talk about what these maps look like for people to get a clear understanding of why the political gerrymandering is such an issue?
Sure. So just to give you an idea, for the last, and I may be wrong, but for the last at least 8 times that state representatives have been elected in Harrisburg for Harrisburg, the majority of the state has voted for Democrats. However, Republicans have a clear majority in the House. And that's because they have been able to gerrymander their own districts, so where they can even pack or crack Democratic votes, specifically communities of color, influencing the result. So what happens is that if you see the raw numbers of voting statewide, we're supposed to have a Democratic majority in Harrisburg, but because of how the districts have been drawn, we have a Republican majority in Harrisburg. Now, with all fairness, let's be honest, gerrymandering happens on both sides, right? There are other states where they are majority Democrats, where sometimes the Democrats are pushing the envelope gerrymandering some states. So the majority of the cases, at least in Pennsylvania, come from the Republican side, but it would be unfair to say that it's only Republicans doing the gerrymandering. So what is HR 1 that passed Congress and S1, their companion bill in the Senate does is that it prohibits political gerrymandering, partisan gerrymandering. It creates independent commissions in order to draw the maps. But obviously, we're far away to get that passed. And I'm sure that Republicans will push for a lot of lawsuits and try to get remedies on the judicial side. So that's why it's very important that we get educated right now with the work that Amelia is doing, that we mobilize our base as well to be ready to be part of this. And it's very important to keep the pressure in our elected officials in Harrisburg, because fair maps can only come if we have a fair process. And a fair process means that we need to have public input, the process has to be transparent, and that people have the possibility of providing feedback to make sure that their communities are represented in the decision making.
And just quickly, for those who are just joining us, we are being joined by Amelia Benson and Fernando Trevino from the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, and they're giving us, all types of knowledge about how important redistricting is and how it, as a policy, affects our daily life. And for the final question, I wanted to go to Ryan before we go to our final guest.
For sure. Thanks, Khari. So I just wanted to, and this is a slightly different, manifestation and application of redistricting, but it's an issue that, has been, in the news in Pennsylvania, and it's one we follow pretty closely at One Hood. So I just wanted to ask briefly about, the potential for judicial redistricting in Pennsylvania, and the high potential for gerrymandering that comes with that. And, just, how much of an eye you as an organization have been keeping on that, if you plan to do any organizing around that issue, if it does look like the, the state legislature might push for that to be, on the ballot in the fall.
Amelia, you want me to take that one?
Yeah, certainly.
Sure.
So I've actually been doing a lot of reading and research. I've been keeping a close eye on House Bill 38. And this bill alone has the potential to impact what our voting and legislation looks like for who knows how long, because it's effectively seeking to put an addendum in the Commonwealth Constitution here in Pennsylvania that allows for approximate judicial representation, which is a very sneaky kind of language that means that instead of having everybody in the state vote on every judicial appointee, it would split them into districts so that they would have a constituency. It would effectively be giving the judiciary a constituency. And Emily Kincaid, when she was defending it on the floor, made an incredibly eloquent point that based on where the folks who are running to be judges tend to gravitate towards to further their careers, doesn't necessarily mean that they are failing to represent people from their hometown. So when a lot of people who are trying to defend House Bill 38 are making their point, they're talking about, oh, well, we want to split people into districts to vote for judges so that they can have representation of their constituency in their neighborhoods. When in fact, I mean, you know, just because I've moved to Pittsburgh from Washington, D.C. doesn't suddenly mean I don't understand how things work in Washington, D.C. And the same goes for these judiciary candidates who are moving to major cities to, you know, build themselves up and expand their careers. So we are actually having a meeting tomorrow night. We're going to have Emily Kincaid come by and discuss this in further detail. But it's a pretty sneaky, terrible bill that we all need to be keeping an eye on, because it just entirely changes the nature of how the judiciary functions in this state. No other state has ever done this. And it really just politicizes the entire process in a way that would negatively impact the checks and balances of the state legislature.
And just to complement Amelia's point, if you guys don't mind, to answer your question, Ryan, yes, obviously it not only creates the possibility of those judicial districts to be gerrymandered themselves, but also it affects directly the redistricting process. Why? And I'm going to try to be brief, because if, let's say, a political party is able to gerrymander judicial districts and gain control of the Supreme Court that way, the Supreme Court plays a pivotal role in both the legislative process and in the congressional process. In the congressional process, like I mentioned before, there's a piece of legislation that is drafted. It's passed by the House and by the Senate in Harrisburg, and then it goes to the governor to be signed or to be vetoed. Because we have a majority Republican in both houses right now, there's a big possibility that the governor, who is a Democrat, will veto that law. What happens then? Litigation happens, and it usually goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ends, drawing their own maps, just like happened a few years ago after the litigation process started in 17. And on the legislative maps, like I was mentioning at the beginning, we have a Reapportionment Commission, the Pennsylvania Reapportionment Commission, that is constituted by 5 members, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. They are supposed to get together and choose the 5th member, who serves as the chair and as the deciding vote. So as you can imagine, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans on something this important will never agree on who that 5th member should be. So the Supreme Court steps in and the Supreme Court appoints the 5th member. So if one political party can control the Supreme Court through judicial gerrymandering, it immediately also controls the redistricting process because of the important role that the Supreme Court plays. So yeah, we are keeping a very close eye on judicial gerrymandering. We are members of the JPAC coalition that I know that you guys have hosted, Khari and other friends that are working with the JPAC coalition. So we're very active with them, not only doing events in coordination with them, but also hosting our own events. And this is something that we're keeping a close eye on it. as of now, we don't believe, at least it's not scheduled yet for a floor vote in the House. However, we are expecting, Republicans to move forward either in the early summer to try to put it in the ballot for the November election.
Thank you so much. I want to thank Amelia Benson and Fernando Trevino from the National Democratic Redistricting Committee for joining us. And we definitely want to have you back on very soon to talk about this issue, because we're going to be dealing with this for the foreseeable future. So thank you so much for all your work and joining us this evening.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And again, that was Amelia Benson and Fernando Trevino from the National Democratic Redistricting Committee. And as you can see, practice is over and we're losing daylight quickly up of Venucci Field. So, that means we have one more guest this evening. And Miracle, would you like to do the honors?
Yeah, so a lot of stuff is like happening around the election. So people are being called away. So unfortunately, our last guest is not able to join us, had to tend to some pressing matters. But with the Black Voters Matter organization, they are on the ground traveling the South. I believe they're in Texas right now to actually amplify various judicial gerrymandering projects, various voter laws institutions. And so they're very active doing on the ground work, and we'll look to have them back in the future. But we wanted to have this conversation tonight to show people how robust the issues impacting the election are. We know we got we have judicial nominees, we have the mayor's race, we have county council, school board, all these people running, but we also have serious issues like the gerrymandering, redistricting, and so we wanted to highlight those.
Right. Yeah. And again, I want to thank Aryan Abney from All Voting is Local. I want to thank Amelia Benson as well as Fernando Trevino for joining us as well. And, such a fantastic information. It's such a great show. As you can see, baseball practice is ending. I need all my vendors to be a little bit of quiet. We're live right now. And like I said, this is live television. And then we just ended practice here, and it's starting to drizzle a little bit. So we got all types of elements here happening right now.
All right.
Baseball, Georgia, voting rights.
It happens. It's all connected, but what I will say, we have a very short programming week. This week we are taking a break from what Black Pittsburgh needs to know. We'll do some rebroadcast tomorrow. Wednesday we'll be back with This Week in White Supremacy. Thursday we have two programs. At 6, we're talking about building your own community table. So we're going live on Take Action on Valley's page. And at 7 p.m. we are joining various other organizations to get involved and to talk about the mayoral election. So we're going to be co-hosting the mayoral forum, and so we're going to be taking a step back with some of the programming, but still tune in. Sign up on Thursday for this mayoral forum. It's not a debate. We're doing forums, COVID-19 restrictions. And so we hope that you join us for the rest of the week. And so stay tuned and follow us at One Hood Power. And thank you all so much for tuning in.
Yeah, I just have one quick thing, special broadcasting, and I have to also confer with producer John tomorrow at 6. We are gonna have a special a juvenile task force, a town hall, partnering with APA. I will be helping moderate that, so look for some more information and a flyer probably tonight, if not first thing tomorrow morning. But it will be a special 6 o'clock edition tomorrow with APA. We're gonna have 4 members of the juvenile, civilian members of the Juvenile Justice Task Force, talking about everything folks can do between now and mid-April to keep pressure, on that group to have the right recommendations. There is a lot of pushback that has happened from conservative groups over the last couple of weeks on the recommendations. So be sure to stay tuned for that tomorrow at 6 p.m. And I will be one of the moderators.
Well, I think that's it. We thank you so much for tuning in to the One Hood Power Hour. We hope you join us next week because we will be having a forum about the school board. So we have invited the Pittsburgh Public School Board candidates to join us next week here from 7 to 9. So it will not be a power hour. It will be an actual intended 2-hour program with local school board candidates. So we hope to see you then.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. Again, thank you, Aryan Abney, Fernando Trevino, and Amelia Benson, and sending our best to Brittany Smalls from the Black Voters Matter Fund, and good luck with all the work that's going on in Texas. Thank you for joining us again. Special edition tomorrow, Tuesday, 6 p.m., and then join us for the Sunday night sit down. And again, every Monday at 7. Stay safe, stay engaged, stay involved in the process. Thank you for joining us. See you next Monday at 7. Good night.